Hi boys and girls. I'm here with our read aloud book, The Mystery of Craven Manor, and we are getting close to the end. We only have about 5 chapters left. So today I'm going to be reading you chapter 14, and it's called The Chimney. The sudden fall of soot made no noise as it drifted down to the hearth. Matt guessed it had been caused by nothing more than a bird settling on the chimney top. But the first tiny seed of an idea began to germinate in his brain. Craven Manor was an old house built in the days when logs were the only means of heating, and even in the bedrooms the fireplaces were large and functional. When Matt had arrived at the manor, he barely registered the clusters of huge chimneys that loomed above the gray gables of the house, but now he recalled them and he remembered something else. Years ago, one of his aunts had given him a book for his birthday. He hadn't bothered to read it for ages because of its soppy title, something about babies, but one day, with nothing else to do, he picked it up and found to his surprise that parts of it had been quite exciting. It had described the young boys who, in those bad old days, had been forced to climb the insides of chimneys to clean them, and Matt remembered the shivers of horror the tale had aroused in him, and the relief that he lived in the 21st century and would never have to do such a thing himself. He stared at the fireplace thoughtfully. Of course, he wasn't really considering it, he told himself, but he would just have a quick glance first, just out of curiosity. Crouching, he peered up to see the inside of the chimney and was relieved to see nothing but dense blackness. It's bricked up, he told himself thankfully as he backed away. But the sky itself was black, really black with hardly any stars. How could he be sure that the blackness he had seen was a bricked up blackness and not just the night sky? Well, it didn't matter anyway. He had no intention of doing such a stupid thing as climbing that chimney. What if he got stuck halfway? Or what if Mr. Higgins or Irene came in and lit a fire under him? He shuddered. No. Even if being shot at dawn was the only alternative, he couldn't do it. He turned back to bed, crawled beneath the covers, rolled himself into a ball, and tried to close his mind to what was going to happen in the morning. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. And then, oh man, flinging the bedclothes aside, he got out and stamped across to the fireplace. Again, he peered upwards, and this time he saw the faintest sparkle of light in the blackness above him. It was a star, a single faint, far-off star. So what did it prove? He argued with himself. It proved that the chimney was not blocked off. It didn't prove that it was wide enough for him to climb, that there would be proper footholds, that he wouldn't fall down or get stuck, or he thrust his mind further, more gruesome possibilities. Climbing up the chimney was definitely not something he wanted to do, but what other choice did he have? He sighed. None. All right, he goes. Here goes it. Starting to his full height inside the base of the chimney, he stretched his hands above him and began to explore the sides. So far, so good. There was ample room for his shoulders, the broadest part of him, and the crevices between the stones were deep enough to take his fingers and his toes off, and the toes of his shoes. Still, he hesitated. He pictured birds stuck in chimneys, dying slowly of thirst and starvation. He pictured the children in that book. No, he couldn't do it. He couldn't. Then he took a deep breath and began to climb. He had not been prepared for all the soot. He had expected to get dirty, but he could have never have imagined the thick, choking blanket that began to smother him as he climbed. Every movement he brought more soot cascading down, silting up his eyes and nose and mouth until he felt like he was being buried alive. He couldn't breathe. Panic filled him, but he managed to turn his face downwards and draw a single vile-tasting breath. Then he willed himself to remain motionless, eyes and lips tightly closed, lungs bursting, until the soot gradually settled. Cautiously, he took another deep breath, held it, and climbed another few inches, fingers and feet groping for crevices. The soot swirled again, and he waited again, then moved upwards a little further. It was tiring work, and panic kept threatening to overwhelm him. But he was winning, he told himself. The constant pauses made progress slow, but he thought he must be halfway by now, perhaps on a level with the ceiling of his bedroom. There was still the shaft that went up to the top floor of the house, the attic floor. But after that, he would be within a few feet of the opening. And then he slipped. The notch into which he had wedged his right foot suddenly crumbled, his fingers lost their grip, and he was plunging down through the blackness, chins, wrists, elbows, and knees painfully scraping the old stones. He didn't fall all the way to the bottom. His fall ended with a few final agonizing scrapes, and he found himself wedged, still upright, but with one knee jammed against his stomach and his left sleeve caught on some small projection above his head. The soot swirled in a dense cloud, and the inside of his mouth was caked with the stuff. His lungs were empty, the air knocked out of them by his fall, and the panic-stricken, he wanted to snatch mouthfuls of the thick black atmosphere around him, like a drowning man gulps for water. But somehow he forced himself to wait until the soot settled. At last he found he was able to breathe, but he hurt all over. He could feel tears welling up in his eyes and forcing muddy paths down his cheeks, and his nose began to bubble like babies. If he ever got out of this, he sobbed, he would never do anything stupid again, but please let this all be over by the time he had counted to 1,000. It was a silly prayer, but the counting helped to keep him calm when he discovered that he could not go down the last few feet of the chimney. His jammed knee meant that the only way he could go was up, and that only by strenuous heaving and pushing. But once he started again, he determined that he would reach the top. He climbed more quickly this time, his hands and feet more confident and practiced, and soon he was beyond the point where he had fallen. But then he encountered another problem. The chimney began to narrow as it passed through the attics. He struggled on, the walls of the shaft pressing more and more uncomfortably against his body, his movements restricted to mere wiggles. He stopped, held in position by the jailer's grip of the chimney, and felt fear rising in him again. How much narrower would it become? Would it reach the point where he was well and truly stuck, unable to go on or retreat? He thought of dying in this narrow black prison, and he imagined his body lodged for years, perhaps even centuries, no one knowing he was there, unless someone tried to light a fire. He still had a choice. He could go on. It was a risk, a terrible risk, but he was so near success. Already he could feel cooler, fresher air above him, and the burnt, sooty smell of the walls was less noticeable. Or he could go back. And at this thought, his heart sank. If he went back, all his efforts would have been wasted, all the scrapes and bruises in vain. And then he would have had to face the morning and Mr. Higgins. No, there was no choice. He had to go on. For once he was thankful that he was small for his age, and tried to make himself even smaller, stretching his arms high above his head and folding in his shoulders to lessen their width. It was a struggle, but determinedly he pushed and squeezed, propelled by the upward thrust of his feet. His legs ached, and he ascended by slow, agonizing inches, but he was moving, coming closer and closer to freedom, until at last he felt the play of cool air on his face. The top of his head was level with the top of the chimney. He paused and rested for a moment. Then he braced his legs and gave one last tremendous, desperate heave. For a moment he stuck, and then, like a cork popping out of a bottle, his head and shoulders shot upwards, and he half fell, half collapsed over the brick stack. He had done it. For a long time he rested, legs still dangling inside the chimney, while he took gulps of the fresh night air. Then he summoned one last effort and hauled himself onto the roof. That is the end of chapter 14. I would like to hear from you. What do you think is going to happen to Matt next? He's on top of the roof, but do you think he will get out of Craven Manor?